Hey YouTube, Mr. Terry back here once again for another History Teacher Reacts video. Today I'm going to be watching the first video I've ever seen from Simple History. I know this is a pretty popular channel. It's been recommended to me a lot, so it seemed like an obvious choice to check out and what they got for us. So what I did is I went over to their channel and went to their videos and then did a sort by most popular, and this is the first one that came up. It is titled "The Green Beret Who Went on a One-Man Rampage to Save His Comrades." So sounds like I know the title's pretty self-explanatory here, so we'll see what they got here. All right, if you enjoyed this original video, make sure to go to the link that I'll have in the description to the original video, so you can give them a like and subscribe and things like that. It's important to me for these React videos that you give the original creators the support that they deserve. All right, well, I think we'll go ahead and get started here with, again, the Green Beret who went on a one-man rampage to save his comrades. Let's see what they got. Roy,
the Green Beret
Benavidez,
went on a
Tango,
one-man
Mike.
rampage. Roy Benavidez, the Vietnam War.
Okay, so we got
Roy
Vietnam.
Benavidez's life had been rough as a child. Both his parents had died. He was bullied by his classmates because of his mixed Yaqui Indian and Mexican heritage, and had to leave school in 8th grade to help his family. At the age of 19, Benavidez joined
rough.
the Army, serving in the Korean War in the Texas Army National Guard. He married Hilaria
So he served in
Lala
Korea
Coy Benavidez in
as well?
1959 and completed airborne training, becoming assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division. In 1966, Sergeant Roy Benavidez was in hospital after stepping on a landmine. Doctors said he would never walk again. He had been sent to Vietnam in 1965 as an advisor for the ARVN troops there. Benavidez was carrying out a classified operation alone to gather evidence that the North Vietnamese troops were posing as Viet Cong.
Man, we know intel was so difficult in the Vietnam War. It was one of the hardest things was to differentiate like who were Viet Cong and who weren't, because basically a lot of the people in Vietnam lived kind of dual lives. They, in everyday life they lived as simple farmers, and then at night, would take into arms, and intelligence was very difficult. And I can only imagine doing some kind of undercover mission to get intelligence on the Viet Cong would be unbelievably dangerous to do. So it looks like this guy has his work definitely cut out for him. So yeah, I'm interested to see I guess how that would turn out.
While he was on patrol along a narrow trail disguised as a Viet Cong guerrilla, he stepped on a landmine. Sometime later, a squad of Marines came across Benavidez. They initially thought it was a booby trap, but were surprised when they flipped him over and discovered the man in Viet Cong pajamas was Hispanic and wearing U.S. Army dog tags.
Okay.
He was soon evacuated to the hospital.
Right. Yeah, you had to be so cautious in the Vietnam War because of a lot of booby traps. The Viet Cong and those that the Americans were fighting against experienced just incredible amounts of like booby traps. The Viet Cong and they and just the Vietnamese in general on both sides were so good at using their terrain, right, to their advantage. This kind of jungled area. I mean, let's go way back into Vietnamese military history. The Chinese had always struggled with fighting in Vietnam. It was one of the only places that ever was able to withstand the Mongols. The Mongols came down and couldn't fight in the jungles, and their horses couldn't deal with it. The Vietnamese, because this is the American part of the Vietnam War, the Vietnamese had just finished off fighting the French for years and years. They are masters of guerrilla warfare, and so they are experts at this time of using their terrain, and people had to be very, very cautious, extremely cautious, almost every step you took, because there could be a trap, a landmine, an ambush somewhere. Would have been extremely frightening to deal with. But yeah, you see with him stepping on a landmine, which was a very common thing that happened in the war. You know, sometimes you'll see a lot of Vietnam War veterans with potentially like a missing leg or something like that, and that is one of the major reasons, unfortunately for them, for the cause of that, and how rough that must have been.
In hospital in the U.S. 2 months later, Benavidez had recovered and awoke. His memories came back to him. The doctor told him he would never walk again. His spine had been damaged, and his brain had rattled in his skull. Nevertheless, Benavidez, sitting in his wheelchair, begged the doctors not to discharge him from the Army. The Army was his life. Determined, Benavidez got up from his bed night after night, dragging himself to the wall and putting weight on his legs. For weeks, he pushed through the pain,
just
going further a distance
rehab himself,
which surprised the doctors. 6 months later, with his wife Lala's support, Roy Benavidez walked out of the hospital. He was promised only a desk job at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, but determined and exercising every day, he trained vigorously and qualified for the Special Forces, also known as the Green Berets. He would be assigned to Detachment B-56, 5th Special Forces Group Airborne, 1st Special Forces. 6 hours in hell. Now it was 1968. Staff Sergeant Roy Benavidez, now with the code name Tango Mike Mike, was back in Vietnam and was off duty attending church, but his mind was fixed on the panicking radio chatter from the front lines. In Loc Ninh, Vietnam, near the Cambodian border, a 12-man Special Forces reconnaissance team, which included his close friends, Sergeant First Class Leroy Wright, Staff Sergeant Lloyd Frenchie Mousseau, Specialist 4 Brian O'Connor, and 9 Montagnard tribesmen who were part of the Civilian Irregular Defense Group program, or CIDG, were surrounded by a battalion numbering 1,000 battle-hardened North Vietnamese soldiers. Everyone in the unit had been wounded or killed in earlier fighting, and 3 of the helicopters sent to rescue them had been unable to extract them due to heavy enemy fire.
Another thing about extractions, since Vietnam is so thickly forested, there are very few suitable landing zones in a lot of these war zones. And the ones that were suitable for it, the ones like actually around, where the battlefields might be, the Vietnamese knew that, so naturally they would put up defenses there. And one of the highest casualty, maybe the most highest casualty jobs in the United States Army during the war was helicopter pilots, because again there was only very limited with how many places you could land, and you better believe that those places to land are going to have defense around them. So it took it was pretty scary. It took a lot of guts to go in and try to do these extractions, because you probably met some resistance for sure. It was hard.
The helicopters returned. They were riddled with bullets. One of them, the door gunner, Michael Craig, age 19, had been hit several times and died in Benavidez's arms. There was no way Benavidez was going to leave his friends out in the jungle. Benavidez jumped onto a returning helicopter that was going back in, volunteering so quickly that he didn't have time to get his M16, so was only armed with a Bowie knife and medical supplies. Benavidez described it as
incredible.
Going into autopilot.
Why you would do that?
As he was approaching the extraction zone, Benavidez realized his fellow team members were too severely wounded to run the distance to the helicopter. There was so much enemy gunfire that the pilot, Larry McKibben, had to zigzag in an attempt to
that's what I'm
dodge
talking
it,
about, why it was so
nevertheless
hard for the
able to
helicopter
provide
pilots.
Covering fire. Benavidez jumped out with a medical bag, ran through the jungle to the wounded men under heavy enemy fire, taking a shot to the leg, which he initially thought was a thorn bush. He found Mousseau first, against a tree whose eyeball had been shot out and was hanging down his cheek, but was determined to keep shooting back.
Jeez.
CIDG were in a pool of blood and patched up as best they could. Benavidez dragged everyone into a defensible position to direct their fire at the enemy and provided morphine to the wounded. He then saw O'Connor and an interpreter CIDG who he motioned to move over to him, but the gunfire started again and they took cover. Another round then hit Benavidez in his thigh. On adrenaline, he popped a green smoke from McKibben in the rescue helicopter to pick them up. While everyone who could move got into the chopper, he suppressed the tree line with an AK-47 he had picked up to cover O'Connor and the interpreter who crawled towards the helicopter. Now Benavidez was looking for the team.
AKs were used on the other side, so he must most likely that's where he had got it from. So that's pretty crazy. yeah, they possibly grabbed an enemy AK or gun just in general.
Cover O'Connor and the interpreter who crawled towards the helicopter. Now Benavidez was looking for the team leader, Sergeant First Class Leroy Wright, who had been killed and who also had intel on him that could not get into enemy hands.
Oh.
Benavidez found his body and proceeded to drag him to the chopper when he was shot again, this time in the stomach, and hit in the back by shrapnel from a nearby grenade.
He was shot 3 times and shrapnel.
When he awoke, Benavidez was forced to leave his dead friend's body. Disaster had also struck. The chopper had crashed to the ground from enemy fire. The pilot,
Now what?
Kibben, is dead. 5 of the men on board, including Mousseau, survived the crash, as did O'Connor and the interpreter who didn't get into the helicopter. Benavidez pulled them out of the wreckage, dispensed morphine, set up a perimeter around the crash site, and called in heavy air support from the F-100s above, which dropped napalm on the enemy position. When the jets ran out of fuel and had to leave, the enemy machine gun fire started again. Benavidez gave O'Connor a 3rd shot of morphine.
Man,
and took
thank
another
heavens
bullet to the leg.
for morphine,
The
huh?
position was surrounded by North Vietnamese soldiers. It looked hopeless. But a helicopter finally came to their rescue. Benavidez and the rescue team carried and dragged the wounded men onto the chopper, but the landing zone was still being fired upon by NVA troops, to the extent that 2 men were shot in the back as they crawled to it. Shrapnel wounds to his face from earlier caused Benavidez's vision to be blurred from the blood in his eyes. When he went to get Mousseau, an NVA soldier butted his rifle into Benavidez's head and jaw and slashed his arm with his bayonet. He shouted to O'Connor to shoot, but he was too drugged from morphine to react. Benavidez pulled out his Bowie knife and stabbed the NVA soldier.
Is this guy
till he was
Rambo?
dead. He then dragged Mousseau to the helicopter and killed 2 more NVA with an AK-47 who were out of the helicopter's side gunner's arc of fire. And then he made one more trip to get the interpreter and destroy any classified material, with blood still obscuring his vision. Only then did he allow the others to pull him onto the helicopter, the last man to leave the battlefield. At this point, the round that had hit his stomach had exposed his
For real?
intestines, which he was trying to hold in with his hands. The helicopter, badly shot up and with no instruments left, managed to take off.
All right, so yeah, this guy was shot how many times, and then got hit with the butt of a rifle, and then got sliced up from a bayonet, and he was shot. Yeah, one of the shots in the stomach, and his guts are hanging out. And how could you possibly survive? Or does he? Guess we'll find out.
When they landed, the wounded were unloaded and examined one by one. It had turned out that Benavidez had even loaded 3 dead enemy soldiers into the helicopter in case they had classified materials.
Oh,
They were left to the side, as was Benavidez. He couldn't move or speak because of the broken jaw from the rifle butt. The blood over his eyes had
broke his
glued them
jaw.
shut, and with 37 bayonet, bullet, and shrapnel wounds all over his body, he looked dead. Medics started placing him in a body bag and started zipping him up when a friend noticed him and said,
Gotta be dead,
"That's
right?"
Roy. That's Roy Benavidez." The doctor said there was nothing that could be done, but Benavidez mustered his last bit of energy and spat in the doctor's face, causing the doctor to say, "I think he'll make it."
oh.
He was flown to Japan for intensive surgery.
So he spat to let him know that he was still alive. Is that what? Is that why? Let's see that again.
Say, "I think he'll make it." He was flown to Japan for intensive surgery, then Brooke Army Medical Center, Fort Sam Houston, where he stayed for almost a year. Roy Benavidez had survived 6 hours in hell and saved 8 lives. Benavidez's commander had put him in for the Distinguished Service Cross because the process for awarding a Medal of Honor would take much longer, and he was unsure if Benavidez would live or die before he could have received it. Finally, on February 24, 1981, President Ronald Reagan would present Roy Benavidez the Medal of Honor. Reagan said if the story of his heroism were a movie script, you would not believe it. Benavidez said of his actions, "The real heroes are the ones who gave their lives for their country. I don't like to be called a hero. I just did what I was trained to do." Master Sergeant Roy Benavidez died on November 29, 1998, at the age of 63.
Fascinating story.
Subscribe for more Vietnam War history videos.
Yep. You know, it's amazing when you hear these stories of what soldiers go through on in so many different wars, on all different sides of the wars, different, it doesn't matter which side you're on. You hear so many of these stories of people trying to save their fellow soldiers, their fellow kind of brothers in arms there. And there's, it's incredible some of the people, or what people have done in a lot of these circumstances, and that very few people would be able to have the mental fortitude to do that. And you see it on, again, like every war, on every side of each war. There's stories all around there. It's pretty incredible what how people can function under that type of process and stress, right? Because I don't think, unless I haven't fought, I've never been in the military, but I don't think we could imagine how stressful and what, like, mentally, physically, war does to you, and how you're going to act in those moments. And I don't think you can know, unless you've been there, what you think you would actually do. You know what I mean? We say what we think we would do in those situations, but doing it is something differently entirely. So, these stories are so interesting to hear about, these people doing these sort of things in wars. Well, anyway, fascinating story happening out there. These are interesting to look at, because sometimes you hear about people in countries getting awarded for medals of bravery, and you see them put it on, but you don't really often know what the story was. And again, you couldn't probably grasp it unless you were there as one of the people that were seeing that. But it puts a little more perspective maybe if you hear about these people and hearing their stories out there. So, okay. Well, very good. No, that was just a good watch there to see a story like that. If you like this original video, again, I encourage you to go to the original video, which I'll put a link down below, where you can give them a like and subscribe. Again, if you liked that. If you liked what we did here, okay, just idea of history teacher talking about history videos. It'd be great if you subscribed. Whether you do or not, though, I really appreciate you watching here. Also invite you, if you would like to join our Discord channel right now, to keep going with historical conversations. That's kind of the point of the Discord that we have. There'll also be an invite link down below. All right, with that, I think we'll go ahead and call it a video. Thanks again for watching today, and I hope to see you very soon.